Thank
You
you.
can see that okay?
Yep, it's displayed, and welcome everybody. I believe this is our 6th regional plan snapshot series. And today we are going to hear from Jordan Hollander with the City of Flagstaff about population and demographics for the regional plan area. As you just saw, this is being recorded, so we'll have a chance at the end to also go offline, and if you have questions, you can ask questions.
Sorry, that was having some technical difficulties there for a
That's
second.
all right. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions that are not being recorded. So again, this is our one of our long series of regional plan snapshots, where we're giving an overview of topics that are important to help building the foundation for the regional plan update. And so population demographics is obviously one of the key foundations that we base a lot of our analysis on. So go ahead to the next slide, Jordan. Yeah, so these are most Mondays at noon. You can register ahead of time on the regional plan website. They're 15-minute presentations followed by 15-minute question and answer, and the video recordings will be posted to the YouTube channel. We're looking for comments. These are drafts, so anyone watching this, if you have comments and want to get back to us on the content of the presentation, that would be terrific. We're also looking for surveys, which we'll talk about at the end, as far as if the presentation was useful. And then just so you can mark on your calendars, the next topics coming up in November, next Monday, the 8th, and then the 15th, is everything about transportation 101 and 201. So with that, though, I'll hand it off to Jordan.
Alrighty, thanks, Melissa. So just as we get going here, just want to provide a quick reminder about the Flagstaff planning boundary, which includes both the City of Flagstaff and a number of unincorporated communities within Coconino County. One of the things that we also wanted to do as part of this webinar is to provide some background information on where this type of data comes from and what it looks like. For population and demographic data, we rely pretty heavily on data produced by the US Census Bureau, primarily data that comes out of 2 surveys that they conduct, the Decennial Census and the American Community Survey, or ACS. And just to differentiate the two, the census is conducted every 10 years. It attempts to count every single person in the United States and produces data on population, home ownership, race, ethnicity, sex, and age. The American Community Survey, on the other hand, is conducted every single year, counts a sample of the population, and then extrapolates out to the entire population and asks many more questions than the census. It can include information on topics from education, employment, transportation, and it even includes some questions on internet and computer access these days. ACS data is then released to the public in both 1-year and 5-year estimates. Because this is a sampling survey, the 5-year estimates allow for data to be released with a slightly smaller margin of error than the 1-year estimates. The trade-off here, though, is that the data is a period estimate and may not reflect year-over-year changes as well as the 1-year estimates do. So during this presentation, I'll primarily be using ACS 5-year estimates, but we'll include some data from the census related to the total population of our region. Data from the census is then released at a number of different geographic levels. The ones that we most often use include the country as a whole, the state level, the county level, and then within the county, we have a number of census geographies listed here in descending order of size, which include census tracts, block groups, and blocks. And then we also can get data at the place level, which includes cities, towns, and census designated places like Doney Park. We also want to make sure that everybody is aware that you can access census data yourself. The data.census.gov platform has gone through a number of improvements in recent years, making access by the general public a lot easier. One of the things to help with this, one of the things that I've tried to do in this presentation is provide the census data table ID in each slide so that you can go and check out the data for yourself if you are so interested. All right, so diving into some of the data, starting out with population in our region here, it probably comes as no surprise, but our population is and has been growing. Within the city of Flagstaff, the population has grown by close to 24,000 people since the year 2000. That's about a 45% growth rate over that time. Our region as a whole and Coconino County have also experienced growth over that time period. The county has grown by close to 29,000 people. And just to note here, our growth numbers for the region are the same as the city because we had some issues with the 2000 census data for the region as a whole. One of the things that we have to do is extrapolate from census geographies to our regional planning area. So that was a little tricky with 2000 data. We will be updating that at some point in the near future, though. In terms of our overall population density, again, probably not much of a surprise, but our population density is much higher within the Flagstaff city limits. The map here is showing population density by census tract. Particularly, you can see that the darker blue areas are closer to the urban core of Flagstaff, of the city itself. The areas outside of the city are more rural and have a much lower population density than within the city itself. In terms of where we're headed with population, the Arizona Commerce Authority uses ACS and census data to project out the population over a 30+ year time horizon. And we can see here that the AZCA methodology for our city and county lead to expected growth over the next 30 years. The city of Flagstaff is expected to reach a population of about 91,000 by 2050, whereas the county is expected to reach a population of about 163,000 by 2050. And you'll notice that there isn't a regional estimate here, and that's because that has to be developed internally. Again, our regional planning area is not a census geography, so we have to develop a methodology to project out for the population. Onto race and ethnicity. Our community is diverse. Shown here in this tree map is a breakdown of race and Hispanic and Latino origin for the city of Flagstaff. Within the city, about 19% of the population identifies as Hispanic or Latino, and 22% identify as people of color, or in ACS terms, a racial group other than white alone. So of this group, American Indian and Alaska Native is the largest at about 8% of the total population. The region as a whole looks very similar to the city. About 18% of the population identifies as Hispanic or Latino, and 20% identify as people of color. Of that, the largest group again is American Indian or Alaska Native at about 7% of the total regional population. One of the really useful things that we can do with census and ACS data is look at change over different time periods. And here we are showing the percent of the population that falls within the ACS racial categories over two different 5-year estimate time periods. The rightmost column shows the change in the respective group in terms of the proportion of the total population. Red indicates a decline and green indicates an increase. So just to be clear here, this is not indicating a decline in the population of a particular group. It's just showing the change in the percent of the overall population. So it could be that some groups have experienced an increase in their population, but maybe at a smaller rate than some other groups, resulting in the group as a proportion of the total population declining. And that's likely what we're seeing here. The table does indicate that as a proportion of the overall population, the white alone group has grown over the last 10 years, whereas the American Indian, Alaska Native, and other racial groups have declined as a proportion of the total population. Moving on to age, we have a young community. You can see in the age distribution graph here that a significant portion of the Flagstaff population falls within the age buckets that include the 15 to 20 or 34 years of age groups, which certainly includes our resident college student population. Our median age for the city is only 25 years of age, and that is significantly lower than the state overall, which is closer to 38 years of age. This is certainly driven by the fact that we have both NAU and Coconino Community College in the city, where many of the students live here year-round and are included in our population and age data. The region as a whole looks fairly similar, but does have a higher median age than the city alone, at closer to 33 years of age. And this makes sense given the fact that within our region we are including a number of communities such as Donny Park and Mountain Air that would likely have a smaller student population and consist of families and older populations. In terms of languages spoken in our community, again, here we are fairly diverse. Within the city of Flagstaff, about 16% of the population speaks a language other than English, and of that group, the predominant language spoken is Spanish. When we compare this to the state and nation, our population that speaks a language other than English is a little bit smaller. The state is about 27%, whereas the nation is about 21 to 22%. However, 16% is still a substantial portion of the population. The region looks almost identical to the city here. Again, about 16% of the population speaks a language other than English, and the predominant language within that group is Spanish. Onto home ownership within both the city and the region as a whole. Our home ownership rate is lower than the state and national average. They are currently at about 47% for the city and 56% for the region as a whole, compared with more closer to about 64% at the state and national level. Again, this is likely being influenced by our student and young population who are less likely to have the means to purchase a home. It does appear, however, in this graph that our home ownership rate has been slowly growing over the last 10 years by about 2 to 3% over that time period. In terms of living arrangements, the city has a lower number of people per household than Coconino County, the state and nation as a whole. We are at about 2.5 people per household compared with a little over 2.6 at the other geographic levels shown here. Looking at educational attainment, we are a more educated community on average when compared to the state and national average. Within the city of Flagstaff, about 47% of our population 25 years of age and older have a bachelor's degree or higher. Within the region, that looks pretty similar at about 46%. Comparing this to state and national average, we're about 15 percentage points higher. Within Arizona and the nation as a whole, the percent of the population with a bachelor's degree or higher is closer to 30%. One of the really useful things we can do with census data is start to cross-tabulate metrics that we care about with other demographic groups. We'll get into this certainly a lot more in upcoming webinars, particularly one that will be focused on equity, but we wanted to provide some insight into what this looks like to sort of prime that conversation and hopefully help you think about what might be possible with this type of data. So what you're looking at here is the same metric shown on the last slide, the percent of the population over 25 years of age with bachelor's degree or higher, broken down by gender. And we can see here in the last two bars on the bottom that the percent of females with a bachelor's degree within Flagstaff and our region as a whole is higher when compared to men. And this really follows enrollment trends that we have seen nationally over the last 10 years or so. So to put this into a little bit of context, at the end of the last academic school year, 2020-21, nationally, women made up close to 60% of undergraduate enrollment. And for context at NAU, this is closer to 64%. So what we're seeing here is really a sociological trend, certainly coming to life in the demographic data that we have access to. And just a final note here on the type of cross-tabulation. Although we can do this for many data points, we can't necessarily do it for every single one and at any geography level that we're interested in. Sometimes small data samples or the Census Bureau's data privacy program restricts our ability to do this sort of analysis. Finally, on to internet and computer access. Although we have a higher rate of high-speed internet access and computer access than the state and national average, I have labeled this that we are partially connected because we still have roughly 15% of the Flagstaff and regional population that do not have high-speed internet access as of this data. What this doesn't tell us is whether this portion of the population is choosing to forego high-speed internet access, whether they want it and can afford it, or whether they live in an area where the infrastructure does not yet support it. Certainly, as we think about how important internet access has become, which has been made particularly salient during the COVID-19 pandemic, we want to explore this a little more so we can understand who is lacking internet access and why. And as we continue to plan for this type of infrastructure, we want to know where access is needed and desired in our community. So that's it for the data portion. Connecting this all back to the regional plan update. As we move forward, our goal is to really work with the community to develop a plan that is representative of the community and its values. And demographic data can help us with this process in a number of ways. It can help us understand who lives here and how or whether that's changing. It can help us examine outcomes related to regional plan goals and policies. For example, we could look at transportation mode share and see whether more people are biking and walking over time, goals that are related to carbon neutrality in that case. Um, we can use population data that can help us understand growth pressures and plan for growth in our region through the regional plan. We can use data like this to start uncovering disparities and important outcomes like income and education. And finally, looking a little more internally, we can use census data to examine our own outreach efforts. For example, if everyone's showing up to our webinars or open houses or participating in surveys looks fairly similar to one another in terms of age, race, or another demographic characteristics, we know that it's probably not representative of our community as a whole, and we may need to adjust our outreach methods. And then finally, on a more technical note, this type of data is also used as an input into scenario and growth modeling. And this will be something that will be included in the regional planning process in the near future. So thanks for listening. We can go into the Q&A session now. If you have a question or comment, you can either raise your hand with the icon shown here or just type it into the chat box.
Thank you, Jordan. That was really an informative presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Jordan or comments about this topic? I actually had a follow-up question for you, Jordan.
Sure.
If you wouldn't mind just explaining again the region versus the city in terms of the statistics that you just showed. I know that the city is its own incorporated area. And then did you mean by the region, the rest of the county or the regional plan area?
The regional planning area. So if you
Okay.
don't, I'll quickly go back
Thank
here.
you.
So one of the things that I didn't, which gets a little bit technical. So this is when you see region in the presentation, I am talking about this area. And as I mentioned, one of the challenges with this planning area is that it doesn't correspond nicely to census geographies in terms of how we're downloading the data. So one of the things that we have to do when we're looking at the region as a whole is use a census geography that's more granular and clip that data essentially to this boundary. I did have a visualization that I took out for the presentation just because it got a little long and technical. But the idea is that we use some additional analytical software to take some of those geographies and extrapolate the data to this boundary. So that's what you're seeing when you see the regional plan or the regional planning area or region within the data here.
Yeah, thanks for providing that clarification. And then it looked like some of the numbers for the region included the entirety of the county. Is that correct?
That shouldn't be the case. I think there was only one here. So whenever you see region, it is just that region. It doesn't include the entire county. I think there was one, um, this slide was the only one that used Coconino County just because there was some issues with the data being clipped to that regional boundary. But for the most part, whenever you see region, it is just talking about that regional plan boundary, not the entire county.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And just one more note, then I know that a lot of people are wondering about when the actual census data will be released, and I believe
Mhm.
that's next year. Do you have more of a date that you can share with everybody?
Sure. So we only get, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's only a subset of information that we get from the census. Of course, the population, it has home ownership, race, ethnicity, sex, and age. So we do have the population data at a level that we can use it at this point. So when I showed the population data at the beginning, that was based on the 2020 census through what is called redistricting data. It hasn't been released in a very usable format yet. That is coming probably, I believe that's December of this year, with some of the cross tabulations not coming until later next year. So we do have a usable format for at least the population at this time, but not necessarily for the other data points that will come out of that.
Yeah, interesting timing in terms of the regional plans update starting and when the census data will be released. So
Hmm.
we should be in a pretty good position going forward in terms of having the most current data
Hmm.
to start fresh with. Yeah, anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, Sarah, do you want to stop recording then? And we can conclude this.